What is Forest City?
It's a city and not a new town. It's 45,000 acres just to the east of Cambridge. We reckon we can get to between 370,000 houses and 400,000 homes.
Why did you guys want to pick this fight, this kind of venture?
The strategic flaws in the YIMBY movement, which is that, we need more housing. Okay, well, that's nice. How are you going to actually achieve it? This is far more direct, and it's going right to the heart of the problem. If you're going to fight one fight against a bunch of people who are going to oppose this, then why don't you fight a fight worth fighting for? It's just the same level of opposition, so you might as well get something even more radical out of it.
The greatest criticism I assume you face is examples such as HS2, Lower Thames Crossing, Hinkley Point C, big projects that were delayed, over budget, face huge political back and forth. Why would you be different?
It's not a government project that will get delayed and judicial reviewed, so it doesn't have the same pitfalls.
Joe Reeve, Shiv Malik, welcome to the LFG podcast.
Hi.
Yeah, great to be here. Great to be on the other side of the
Shiv, you've been a journalist and an entrepreneur. Can you walk us through your career, including the book that you wrote, Jilted Generation?
Yeah, so it was about 15 years ago, so 2010, September, just as the student protests were kicking off, actually. So then I co-wrote this book called Jilted Generation. And ostensibly, it basically said, look, if we don't sort out housing and infrastructure, we're going to be, as a country, we're going to be screwed. And certainly my generation, so I was young then, I was 29, I'm not young now. You can see how much time has passed. Then, my generation will also suffer greatly. And I think everyone kind of now agrees. It's kind of annoying that people simply agree that that's come to pass. But, no one really likes a Cassandra. So you don't get any credit for being right about something so terrible as that. But before that, I'd done some war reporting. I'd gone off to Afghanistan and Pakistan. I'd specialized in terrorism and then really concentrated then after that on economics.
Why the shift of interest?
I went between the two. So I was like constantly context switching between, at some point in 2015, 2014, like covering ISIS and then complaining about, or whinging if you want, as people put it, kind of about millennials and not having enough housing. So, it keeps it varied. It keeps it enjoyable.
You weren't whinging about millennials.
No, on behalf of us, or so-called whinging. I thought I was, lobbying and advocating. But actually, that word became kind of instrumental. There was so Claire Fox, who's now Baroness Fox, came to me roughly at that time and said, look, well done on writing a book, but isn't it just that, a giant whinge? What are you actually doing? And I was like, that's so annoying, because she's right. And it kind of stuck with me. And I kind of, I went to these book meetings and book events where most of the time, 90% of the time, it was basically boomers, people who are retired, actually shouting me down, saying, we had it hard too. Why are you complaining? Blah, blah, blah. And I wondered for a really long time, where were people my age, right? Why weren't they advocating for their own material circumstances, right? So yes, there were the student protests, but after that, it was people would get interested in climate change and maybe protest about this or that other kind of far more abstract event, but no one would be talking about housing. And even now, right? Still, I've never seen a march for housing, right? It's just I've never seen it, and I've been waiting and watching, and then. And I got a bit depressed after a sort of 2016, 2017, kind of that Brexit moment. Plus I thought, God, where is everyone my age, right? And then I spent a bit of time then talking to NIMBYs. I was like, well, why do they keep batting back on housing? What is the thing? And basically it came down to three things. So it's the same conversation again and again. And you're like, oh, right, it's just the same three things. The houses are ugly. They never come with any infrastructure. And they're just as expensive when they're built as anything else. So what's this like new housing really doing? And they were right? If you've ever lived in a village or a town and you've seen a new extension, you drive past it, you think, oh God, that is ugly. You're like, all right, it is ugly. And it never comes with any infrastructure, right? Or rarely does. And it's such a battle locally to say, you said you'd build a road, and you didn't, or the school, and it hasn't happened yet. So they're right. And I think that also then sent me into thinking more deeply. Like, okay, how can you do this differently, right? If you just thought about this from first principles, how could you? What would it take to actually break not just the NIMBY kind of deadlock, but actually answer their critique at the same time, but also do something for the generation to build housing at scale. So that's when I started thinking about cities. I kind of gave a speech in 2020 during lockdown. I said we should build 10 cities and it should be built on these principles, and we'll come into exactly what those principles are. But again, it wasn't until really LFG came along, and that's when I met Joe, that I thought, okay, the zeitgeist has changed. There could be, it's strange coming to a pub on a Wednesday evening and seeing 200 people pack it out, they're spilling out onto the streets, and they're all there for infrastructure stuff. And you're like, that's weird. This has never happened before. And then I thought, okay, something in the air has just shifted. And maybe now is the right time to try and do something.
And just to get your view on like that context of why there wasn't this kind of groundswell of people earlier. Like, as you say, people were feeling this, materially feeling this. Your age, we've had it ongoing as a problem. It's kind of reached boiling point now. What was that issue? Kind of, why couldn't we gather?
I still don't have a proper answer to it, because you sit round a dinner table and people will talk endlessly about bloody housing. How the house prices are going up and how much rent is and this, that and the other, and they're moving now, and maybe they made a bit of money out of the equity, and oh god. But when it comes to actually advocating for more housing or doing something tangible, that scene has just been dead. And I think it's because I initially thought it was this, which is people blame themselves. And certainly when Jilted Generation came out first, that's what me and my co-author found. People would say, I thought it was my fault. I didn't work hard enough. I didn't earn enough money. Because if I can't replicate what my parents are doing, surely that's on me. I'm a bad child. And it was so sad, and also it's kind of disheartening to kind of witness all of that and actually sort of counsel people and go, no, yes, read the book, but like in the book you'll find that they're like huge structural issues. Like, your parents got this thing called MIRAS, right? So they didn't actually pay any interest on their mortgage, right? It got taken out of their taxes. You don't have that. So there's loads of stuff that made it kind of, gave them a whole set of advantages which we now don't have. And they go, yeah, okay, all right. But I don't know what else it was, because honestly, I have no answer. And I think things needed to get maybe so bad. I mean, lots of people left, right? That was the other answer. They just leave the country. And, I know those people. My cousins, my sister, almost all of my friendship group left for, US, Norway, Germany. And they've raised their kids abroad. I thought we'd all raise our kids together, maybe in a bit of London or kind of in and around. We'd been within a commuting distance, and that's it. And once you have kids and they're old, that you can't go back in time and do that again. It's gone. So it's sort of, all these kind of minor tragedies that no one's going to record in time. They're not national news by any means, right? But that's it. That's what happens. But I don't have an answer. But I think that's what it was. It was they blamed themselves.
It's such an interesting background. But Joe, you started off as a self-taught software developer at 16. You co-founded Future House, which was a members club for techno-optimists, and you, Lawrence and James co-founded LFG together. Now you're working full-time at 11 Labs, and you co-founded Forest City with Shiv. That's quite an odd career path. Has there been any kind of common driving forces between your projects?
Yeah, I mean, I guess throughout my whole career, I've had a sort of split brain, dual track career. I've had doing the tech, sort of working as a software engineer and eventually head of AI at a public company out in California. But I've also, in parallel to that entire time since I quit school at 16, I've also been running events and building communities, and most of that in a social good sense. The first event I ever ran was, I went to a lot of meetups growing up. So I went to meetups from when I was like 11, going to hackathons and tech events. And I got my first paycheck after I quit school, and I bought a camera because I was like, I'm going to get into photography. So I bought, at the time, it seemed like an insanely expensive camera, and I went on to meetup.com and said, what events in my area are there for photography? And I scrolled to the bottom of the page. Well, actually, there was nothing. And Meetup at the time said, there's nothing here, you should start one. And I was like, yeah, all right. And I just created one, listed it as the local pub in my village, where I grew up in Penn in Buckinghamshire. And I created it for the next week on like the worst possible day, the worst, like zero notice, and still like 20 people showed up. And I was 16, wasn't even allowed to be in the pub. But then I had all these like royal chartered photographers come and teach me how to use my camera and buy me beer as a 16-year-old. And it was just an amazing experience. So that was my first ever event that I organised, fully on my own. So that's that sort of community building started, I guess, right at the beginning, at the same time as I quit and started working in software. Literally a month later, because that's when I got my first paycheck.
It's really interesting, right? Because you say you left school 16, you took a very unusual career path. You know, the pressure at that time to go to college is immense, and then the pressure afterwards to go to university is still very high. Why the difference? Like why'd you buck the trend?
I think I have never been very good at doing things that other people have done. I really struggled to be in a classroom doing the same thing as 30 other people or 29 other people, and then knowing that I also am doing the same thing as all the other people my age in the country and people for the last 20 years have been doing. That just something about that felt like it wasn't a good thing for me to be doing. I mean, obviously education is very important. I'm not saying it's not a useful thing, but it just really didn't sit right with me. I didn't enjoy that. I went to quite a few different schools. I got expelled from one. I was not troublemaker in terms of. I was a troublemaker. My teachers didn't like me. My peers liked me, but my teachers didn't like me. Yeah, so it was I just didn't enjoy school. I didn't get on at school, and then I got really poor grades. I even failed English GCSE twice. So I got really poor grades, mostly because I didn't care, and I thought it was stupid to even try and memorize a bunch of stuff for an exam. And you know, again, not necessarily a good opinion to have that I would back now, but it's, you know, the outcome I'm quite happy with. I went to college. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's incredibly brave though to like, you know, there's a lot of students who struggle with school, struggle with the approach, and I have absolute sympathy. We could talk for many, many hours about the problems in the education system, but there's a lot of people who come out of that and feel lost and, you know, don't have any direction at all. Whereas from your side, you obviously had that kind of inbuilt.
I mean, I've been going to these tech events since I was 11, learning to code at meetups and things on basically every evening I could, and then every weekend. I was I was a sort of sailing competitively, so I sailed for in the World Championships for Britain 3 times in this class of boat. So I had sailing, and then when I wasn't sailing, every weekend I wasn't sailing, I was going to hackathons. So it was this very weird, like doing sport and writing code. And so I went to college to study computer game development because it was the most technical, software engineering heavy course I could find. And after being there for 3 months, they were still teaching us basic stuff that I'd learned when I was 11, mostly because the incentives of the course are not really to teach people stuff. They're to like keep them in the building so they don't go off, particularly when it's sort of young people who are not exactly high grades. Generally, it was like keep them in a safe environment where they're not going to bother everybody else. That's at least how I felt I was being treated.
Was that before the rule that you had to stay in education till 18 then?
I think the last year that didn't have that.
Yeah.
So I think my brother, who was a year younger than me, had that rule. He went to university anyway, but I think I was the last generation. Not last generation, last year. So yeah, but I was finding college really boring. I was going to hackathons. I was winning hackathons. The triggering point actually for me to leave and go and get a job was I won a hackathon run by the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office at the time, FCDO, and the guy I was on a team with, he was an engineering manager at The Economist, and he said, "You're better than half the people on my team, and you're still in school. If I hadn't just hired someone last week, I would give you a job offer." So I went home on that Sunday and said to my dad, "This guy said he would hire me. Turns out I'm good." And he was like, "No one's ever going to hire you until you have a degree, or unless you have a degree." I'm in my dad's sort of family. I'm the first person in recorded history that doesn't have a degree. So like really long family tradition breaking here from my side. And yeah, it was a big moment. But I just basically went off in a huff and applied for a job, and then I got a phone call on the way into college the next day and said, "Well, I can come for an interview now," which is obviously not what you would normally do. I was just like, "I'm on the train, I can just come to you instead of going to college." And the guy said, yeah, sure, come in. And this is Ray, who's now even involved in Forest City. He was my first manager and yeah, gave me a job basically on the day.
Have all the kind of communities that you've been involved in building, have they all come from the internet in some way?
They've all used the internet for coordinating. Actually, that's not true. I volunteered at a charity called Lighthouse, which is a Christian children's charity. So taking in everywhere from 3-year-olds, or 4-year-olds, sorry, all the way up to, I think, 11-year-olds were the oldest. And then at that point, you become a helper and volunteer and you go and help. So I went as a kid going through every summer as an attendee and then became a volunteer. And then I eventually became a trustee. And so that's a community, it's sort of a community building on site with people. The people there don't really have a choice about being there, but it is very community driven. It's very church oriented. You know, I grew up going to church. I go to church now still. So yeah, in that sense, I guess church is another community that I was able to first principles take a lot of things from and take that into the community organizing. But yeah, it's not all the communities that I've started really have been via the internet in some way.
And I have to raise, because recently you became, I don't know what the correct term is anymore, Becca will know better than I will, but you became social media famous for building an influencer. I don't know if it's that. Well, maybe it is that level now.
Went viral.
Yeah, it went viral. Yeah, that's the word. That's the other one. Yeah. For a fun little app that you created. I mean, it's humorous, but it's also like quite transformative. I think in its use case, it's quite impressive and quite a novel way of thinking about this kind of technology. Do you want to talk a little bit about what I'm talking about? And hopefully, you've only been viral once in the last couple of weeks, so you know which one.
Yeah, in the last couple of weeks, only once. But obviously, the first time we went viral was the Looking for Growth launch video, which did get a lot of impressions, and then the second time was the graffiti, the second graffiti cleaning session we did. But then, yeah, this social media, or this most recent going viral was a statue app where you take a picture of a statue. I did this at the British Museum because I love the British Museum. Take a picture of a statue. It then uses AI to do a bunch of research on the characters, plural, involved in the statue, who made it, that sort of thing, and then uses AI to create a voice that matches each character, and then you can talk to it and have a conversation. My favourite two, I think, one is the Easter Island, the ancestor from Easter Island, which is this big, deep, booming voice. My second favourite actually is the big T-Rex outside.
Was that you doing impressions, or did you?
No, it's a real. My second favourite actually is the T-Rex outside the Natural History Museum. If you take a picture in it, you get this quite fun like dinosaur-y voice, which the AI is really good.
Is it really high pitched?
Hello. Maybe it should be. I can tune the prompt for that.
I just think I have 2 young kids, and especially the 3-year-old, he's very he loves going to museums. I mean, he's absolutely lovely kid, but he told us once, we were like, what do you want to do on a weekend? He was like, I want to have a baby chino and go to a museum. And we're like, what? My wife, what has she done to my child?
Wow.
Like, no football or anything. It's just science museum, natural history.
I'm sorry to tell you, you have raised a hipster.
Yes, I feel so.
You should get him one of the hats and everything.
Yeah, he does have.
Oh,
yes.
Okay, all right. You did this.
Well, my wife did it, but he
Don't blame your wife now. It's too late.
He would love something like that. Like, it's just such a. I mean, it's so obvious that it's almost frustrating that the museums don't do it themselves. It's like a little plaque, and it's this kind of area of, AI has moved forward so much, and there's this diffusion issue where people are slow to catch up. But it's such like a good idea of just bringing this to life, especially for like small children.
Well, interestingly, actually, I was inspired to do it by Peter Pan statue in Hyde Park. They actually had this before COVID, before ChatGPT. They had this QR code you could scan, and it was this sort of WhatsApp interface, and it had recorded messages, and you could sort of have a conversation. It wasn't free flowing; it was multiple choice. But that was really good and quite engaging. Mostly just fun. It wasn't useful, but it was fun. And so, actually, I'd been wanting to build this app, the statue scanning app, for a long time. And just sort of finally got around to it one Sunday afternoon. And because I could vibe code it so easily, I could just type in the prompt and basically built the whole thing in one go. That's the only reason I did it, because it's now so much easier to build things.
And you're kind of taking away almost or outsourcing almost the like museum creation point of it, right? I remember I went to the Natural History Museum a lot when I was very little. And I remember I kind of you'd look at the plaques and the descriptions of everything, and you couldn't understand it as a kid, and I thought it was great. And you'd kind of ask the adults that were with you, what's this, and it would be so mysterious, and you kind of look around the world. And now when you go to the Natural History Museum, or I found anyway, I feel as if it's kind of dumbed down a lot of the kind of information that they have on the thing, and it's kind of like, and you see this with nature documentaries as well, like the recent ones that have come out, they've taken away like a lot of the kind of facts, and they try and like personalize like the fish or something like that. So it's quite an interesting way of looking at it, that you're taking that and you're like, actually people can give information about all this stuff in a separate way to just the museum.
I mean, one thing I would say, so yes, certainly for museums that don't offer more information, it allows you to go much deeper on something. But one thing I would say is that the curators in these museums know way more information than is on the plaque.
Yeah.
Like my favorite thing with my wife to do, I actually hated museums growing up. I found them really boring for the same reason I found school boring. I was like, look at all the other million people here. I don't care. This isn't new and interesting. But now, seeing Daria experience it, because she's Ukrainian, she started coming to the British Museum after she moved here, before we were married, and she was just, every time she went, she would come back and say, it was amazing, I learned about all this stuff. And I was like, well, I haven't been in years, I'll come with you. And it turns out that she'd been going on the tours, the tour guides, and the tour guides know all the interesting history about these objects that you go and you look at them and they're still really boring, to be honest. But then you hear the story about how, here's a vase that 20 years ago, some crazy drunk guy came in with a hammer and smashed it. And there are only 3 of these, so we had to fix this one. So we fixed it, but we couldn't get it together in the right way. So there are 3 pieces that couldn't fit. But then we used some computers and 3 years ago managed to remodel it together so we could get it so that all but 1 piece fits. So then they had to re-break the vase and then re-glue it together again. So now there's only 1 piece missing. So that sort of thing is really much more interesting, I think, than here's a vase, it looks a bit rubbish because it's been broken, right? Which is literally what's on the, well, not literally, but almost literally what's on the plaque. But you hear all these really interesting stories, and that's something that, to be honest, I don't think this app is ever going to really be able to do unless you talk to the curators and get the curators' input into it. So, yeah, I mean, in a sense it replaces, but I think there's still lots of space for humans to go in and improve and tweak things. So,
right, let's get into it. What is Forest City?
Joe's looking at me now.
I've just been speaking, so it's your turn.
So, what is Forest City? A great question. There's a couple of ways to take this, but let me kind of give a pen portrait to start with. It's a city and not a new town, for 1 million people. It's 45,000 acres, in effect, in planning terms, greenfield, though it's not a tabula rasa. There are lots of people who live there. There's about 8,000 people who live there. The plot site we've chosen is basically just to the east of Cambridge. It's about 7 miles, 6 miles, kind of edge to edge, if you want. And it sits between Newmarket and Haverhill, which some people know. If you find it on the map, you'll see it there. If you put that as a perfect circle over London, just to give you a scale, a sense of scale, it would stretch from Hampstead to Dulwich, in which London, there lives, in that circle, 2 million people. So it's big. It's definitely big, and it dwarfs, in a sense, sort of Cambridge to an extent. Cambridge is about 10,000 acres. This is 45. So that gives you at least some of the scale. And what have we... we were sort of just released these reports where we spent many months. People have worked pro bono, trying to flesh out, again, what is that question? What is Forest City? And we started off with, well, look, if you want to plan a forest city, well, what do the forests look like? And you want to start with the trees. So on that part, I said right at the beginning, there should be 12,000 acres of forest, but it turns out it's actually woodland and marsh. It looks a bit like Epping Forest. It turns out that's the best in a way. That's the best way to plan for a huge kind of nature uplift, rather than just a bunch of trees. So if you've been to Thetford Forest, it's sort of a managed forest with pine trees. That's not what we're going for here, and it would actually make it the largest contiguous land-based nature reserve in England. So there are bigger nature reserves, but that's all obviously an estuary. So it would be massive. It would be absolutely huge. And sticking with that, then obviously there's the idea of it's basically a giant rewilding project where you'd introduce a whole series of other kind of mammals in terms of kind of otters and big
Any news?
oryx, is it oryx?
Aurochs. Famed in as being buried around the Stonehenge.
That's right. So there's a whole plan for the 12,000 and 12,000 acres of woodland, and it's in a sense an attempt to rebalance and reinvent life in the 21st century, right? We all know it can be done, it should be done, and we don't want to live with the kind of legacy of brutalism from the 60s and 70s any longer. So what does it look like? And that's an attempt to answer that part of it. Then at the same time, there's about 22,000 acres for housing, of which we reckon we can get to between 370,000 houses and 400,000 homes. So again, it's a lot, right? The government's target has been 1.5 million. This would cover off giving up to about a third of that, almost. And then on the other side, it's a city. So you've got to have commercial land. And this is the big differentiator between a town and a city. A town's basically somewhere you live in and you commute to go and work somewhere else. A city is all encompassing and everything is there, contains all life if you want. So there's about 8,000 acres of commercial land, and there'll be a central business district. We both agree that there should be some monumental architecture if you want. That's not just in terms of giant statues, which will no doubt you'll be able to speak to and converse with, but also in terms of, yes, there should be skyscrapers. It should compete with London. And in some ways, it's also, maybe getting slightly off topic here, but it should stand as a testament for, a kind of a new generation looking at London going, you failed anyone under 45. If you want to raise kids, if you want to really be ambitious, yes, it's allowed for that. But actually, it's a new space in which to actually realize all of those opportunities which have been dampened, which has been part of our legacy of kind of growing up for the last 15 years of stagflation, right? It just hasn't worked out. Great, let's start in a sense afresh and release and unlock all of that growth.
It's quite a radical proposal, right? There's people talking about new towns, and that's kind of as far as it's gone. People about an entire new city, and anyone that's played SimCity knows that you generally start small, and if you survive the volcano, which happily probably won't be a risk that you guys will face for Forest City, but this requires planning over multi-year processes, and obviously what you're talking about is you're going to have to, you just can't plunk houses and commercial zones, etc., and just expect things to kind of appear. So what is your kind of timeline or process that you've designed?
Before we get into timelines, something that I've found quite fun, well, it's a little bit frustrating, but it's also quite funny. Whenever we talk to people, even though we say city, not a town, they're still thinking in the new towns framing. And we were talking to someone inside government, and they said, so why didn't you submit as a location on the new towns project, the new towns call for proposals? And we're like, well, one, it's not a town, it's a city, and two, we're newer than that, right? We actually started doing this after the new towns call for proposals for locations opened. So but yeah, towns, cities, very different. I'll let you speak to the scale piece and timelines.
Yeah, so on the delivery, again, it's very fast. The idea is to get a symbolic spade in the ground by the end of this parliament, and it can be done. So to give you an example, obviously, the Olympics, that was a year and a half kind of planning, and it was full pelt. We had a deadline. Great, we can do that again. Milton Keynes, the public consultation for that was about 6 weeks, right? So again, you can do things incredibly quickly if you want to, if things are set up in that way. So here we are now. It's at the time of recording, the sort of 10th of March. We've got a couple more months, and we would like an expression of interest from government. That will allow us to then raise from investors who are already speaking to us, incredibly keen, and can speak to why that they are keen in a bit. But and we need to raise basically 280 million all in all. So it's a lot of money. Why? That money will go into master planning for 2 years. out, master planning a city is incredibly difficult. We've got a huge list. It sounds like, oh, we just draw some pictures and that'll be nice and that'll do it. And, it's just vast amounts of, environmental studies.
Do you take any influence from any other cities around the world?
Well,
and the way they've been built?
Yeah. I mean, well, there's a piece there about the kind of socioeconomic element to it. Which I think the inspiration comes, for me at least, was, Bourneville and obviously, the Letchworth Garden City and Ebenezer Howard's work, where the idea is basically that it can be, in a sense, somewhat self-sufficient, right? It's actually owning itself, and therefore it can draw rents from around it. So things like taxes can be far lower. Singapore is a great example of that. It owns 90% of its land. It leases things out, and on actually based on the British system, right? They learned from Brits, and then we forgot our own lessons. The City of London is another exemplar of that, right? One of the oldest, contiguous kind of ongoing or extant bodies running a city. Well, we've got one here, and what's the lesson from that? Well, it owns vast amounts of property, and also things like Epping Forest and Hampstead Heath, and it keeps those going, and it draws rents, and it again invests back into itself. So in a sense, this is also socioeconomically takes that inspiration from that kind of a model, right? If you've got a new place in which to start, and this makes it very different from not just new towns, but town extensions, right? Where land is very expensive. If the land is a lot cheaper, well then great. How do you model that to then make it sustainable for the next 150, 200 years to generate actually income for itself? But going back to the delivery overview, then we've got 2 years of master planning, and then also that includes drafting up the legislation. So then government can then take it forward, and if they decide, yes, this works, it makes sense, we might actually generate a lot of growth from this. Wouldn't that be nice? And they would have to inevitably, I guess, partly make it, part of their election campaign, and a differentiator for them against other parties that might not want this. Great, that sort of sets them apart. And then we get a symbolic spade in the ground, I think, at that point, right? Once the legislation is passed, you can say, great, we've broken ground. And then we'll probably have to go back and redo some of the master planning and check that it all works, and then progress ahead, which is basically what happened with the Olympics.
And we will get into some of the kind of criticisms where you can answer back. So it's ones you've no doubt heard before, but I would be keen to just touch on kind of two angles. One is the investors you talk about. So there's obviously appetite from the other side. And, in a kind of ideal world almost, you'd be able to do what we did back in the old days, which was just like, if there's money, if there's private equity and interest in it, you just build the city, you just do it, right? Obviously we're in a different world of central government planning, etc., to hurdle through as well. So one would be just good to understand, like, why are investors interested in this? What's that kind of angle? And then second question is just kind of more broadly on, like, why did you guys want to pick this fight, this kind of venture? There's plenty of things you could do. Equally, as you said earlier, people have not really engaged in the kind of house building problem for many years, and started that the ground started to come out with such a bold plan of actually, it's not just enough to do some towns and to expand some villages. We need to build an entire city. Like, what's the driver for that?
Yeah, I mean,
do you want to take the investors? Yeah, go on.
So there are lots of reasons that investors are interested and excited about this. One is there's money to be made for building something at scale. That's true, and that's true of any development. One of the things we're doing is protecting the scheme so it doesn't end up as like a money extraction project for which would actually not fulfill any of the goals, but also structurally it would mean that the city itself doesn't work. If you just turned up all the rents and tried to make as much money out of it, the entire project would fail. So, but there is still, even given that, there is still a lot of opportunity for an investor who comes in early to make money back from their investment.
And just so we're really clear, ACDC is basically, our job is to do all of that master planning, actually option the land, and basically hand everything to the government on a silver platter. In return, and this is how Canary Wharf worked, we get 80 acres at the centre of the city. That's our reward. If that ends up being worthless, then everyone loses money. If it is worth something, great, and we've taken the risk and promoted this and trying to make this work, then great. then that's the return for the investors. But no one otherwise is giving us 280 million to try and have a go, right? So it's got to be sensible, and this is how we've structured it, just like Canary Wharf.
Yeah. So there's money to be made. There's also something really exciting about building a city. The first city in major city, the West has built or will have built in over 50 years, since Milton Keynes, effectively. So in terms of the sort of appeal, you've got some people who are looking at it and they're like, I just really love investing in land. I love investing in development projects. You've got the romantic capital who are either they're in Britain and they just really want to fix these problems, and we get these people calling us up all day, every day, basically saying, I just want to help. How do we solve these problems that you've identified? And you have a solution that looks like it could actually work. I want to be involved. You then also have, and this is another type of investor that we get inbounds from, is people in the Middle East who are like, I just want to buy British land. How do I spend money on British land? They're a bit less sort of maybe less aligned to the core problem of solving the British sort of housing and access to commercial land problems that we have. But there's a massive range. But I think the core thing is this isn't a gamble. It's not philanthropy. We're not coming at this saying we just want to throw a bunch of money in a hole and hope that it makes people's lives better. It is a real project that, if it succeeds, yes, they make money. The government makes money. Our reports that we've put out are saying over 50 billion GVA, so gross value add, to GDP annually. So plus 52 billion or so every year to global GDP. That's significant. So that's a real legacy that people who maybe want to do something good for the country and have the capital to be able to do it, I really get excited about, because it's not that often that you get the chance to do something that big. So the scale of it attracts a lot of people, as well as just the
once in 50 years is actually turns out is the chance. And just on that, okay, so why this fight, right? I think strategically, for me, let me actually answer this in a slightly different way. I got really fed up. And just kind of depressed that actually, I've been part of the YIMBY scene, if you want, for 15 years. So I think you were probably still in primary school. That's how long I've been at it. And, you could see the strategic flaws in the YIMBY movement, which is that, we need more housing. Okay, well, that's nice. How are you going to actually achieve it? Oh, well, and it was just like, well, just tweet more. And then as recently, I think LFG has been the sort of an outlier or kind of a leader in this, right? Actually, let's put an infrastructure bill together. But actually, and that's brilliant, but it's still abstract, right? You're not actually solving. It's very hard to sell that to ordinary people, right? Especially kind of our age, if you want. We put some legislation through and maybe in 5 years, you'll see a house out of it. This is far more direct, right? And it's going right to the heart of the problem. And the other way of looking at it is, if you're going to fight one fight against a bunch of people who are going to oppose this, NIMBYs, then why don't you fight a fight worth fighting for, right? If you're going to, do, 2,000 homes here or whatever, 10,000 new town, it's just the same level of opposition. So you might as well get something even more radical out of it, right? So get people to step up there. And actually, when you do that call, if we said, we're going to build a new town, no one would have come, right? We wouldn't have had 40 people working on this pro bono. We wouldn't have the hundreds of supporters who, help us out pretty much every week. We wouldn't have had 1,000 plus people signing that petition and that pledge saying, I will, help support this and I want to see this happen. And we certainly wouldn't have had, the board that we do with now, Paul Johnson, one of the foremost economists in the country, joining our board. Tim Loynick, people with, deep planning experience. Steve McAdam, who planned the Olympics, master planned the Olympics in King's Cross, right? Those people are excited by the scale and ambition. So that's why. Why this fight? That's why. If you're gonna do anything, just go big, because it's not worth. It's the same cost you're paying for anything less than this.
What kind of industries do you expect to kind of move into Forest City and actually be active there, and the workers, because presumably the people that live in Forest City will also work there. Some of them might work in Cambridge as well and commute, but kind of what do you envisage like the main industry and kind of like culture of Forest City being?
Yeah, one of the questions we get really asked really often is, why here? Why not in Wales somewhere? Why not in Scotland somewhere where there's lower density? And there are lots of reasons, but one of the reasons is because it's close to Cambridge, really close to Cambridge. That means, well, Cambridge already is an area that the government has for decades wanted and tried to invest in part because it's the highest density of talent in Europe, possibly in the world, depending how you measure it. So Cambridge is really a massive opportunity for growth for our country, economic growth. It's where, I've got a friend who's a CFO of a chemical company improving food security. And they had to move out of Cambridge. Both the founders studied at Cambridge. To move out of Cambridge to a town nearby, Haverhill, where there's no train station, but it's the only place they could find any commercial space. And we were talking to a quantum computing startup that raised $60 million. And there's this genius PhD in quantum computing founder. She is spending all of her time not worrying about quantum computing, worrying about where she's going to get office space. And so these are the kinds of problems that Cambridge already has. And so if we make some space where they could go and grow 8 miles away with a direct train link, that suddenly solves a lot of those problems. So I guess initially we're expecting there to be a lot of demand from around Cambridge, other areas around Cambridge, but also Cambridge itself, the sort of high-tech businesses that are coming out of the university. A bit like you've got Stanford then sends a bunch of companies out to the rest of Silicon Valley because it produces all these research projects that they need to scale and turn into businesses. But you've also got potentially companies coming from other parts of the country, but also maybe even the world, because it's pretty unusual to have all this brand new infrastructure somewhere, yes, close to Cambridge, yes, close to London, but somewhere that a lot of talent wants to live. So if we're able to draw more companies from the rest of the world, that's a great thing. So what will they be? It'll be anything that I think needs commercial land, needs to maybe start doing some modest industry, probably technology. We've got a lot of that here. Obviously,
Let's say,
sort
is it
of
like
AI
kind of
here.
like lab space sort of?
There's lab space. There might be some sort of energy-intensive industries. If we have to build our own energy grid, obviously within the city, that obviously is not done completely disconnected to the rest of the national grid. It's connected there, but we're going to have to build a bunch of new energy infrastructure within the city, water infrastructure. So anything that's energy intensive and water intensive, we're going to have some of the best infrastructure in the country for that, just because it's going to be newer.
I think you were also asking about vibes, right? In part or not?
Well, yeah, and there's a lot of places. I guess one of the, I'm hesitant to say failures of new towns, but I think criticisms of them is that there's a kind of lack of like community around a kind of common culture and what that place is about. And I guess what's your vision for what Forest City stands for, or like is a commonality between the people that are going to move in there? What are their aspirations and why would they want to live there?
So obviously we could say a lot of stuff, but we don't know. No one knows how these.
I just want to pick day in the life of a Forest City resident.
So just taking there's lots of people have lots of ideas for how life should look like in the 21st century, and it's quite difficult to distill all of that. And also, you don't really want to make any kind of promises or start sort of going down a path or suffering from everythingism, and just say yes to everyone, because it sort of then becomes nonsensical very, very quickly. But what is clear, and this is my kind of geek head, I'm like, great. The good news is that whatever we want the culture to be, we have the economic support, which is we can own the city itself. Once it's a development corporation, we'll own a bunch of land that they can say, okay, look, well, we've got these buildings, let's subsidize, artists and musicians, and, a new theatre and the list can go on and on and on. Space and time, which people in London and artists in London, they've all been pushed out, right? And a good example of that is, for example, Roger DeHaan in Folkestone. He had about 100 million invested into Folkestone. He's from the Saga, the company, and he made his millions and ploughed it back into Folkestone. But one of the first things that he did was create the artistic quarter. He basically had, penny rents for a bunch of really quirky businesses that were willing to be and were super characterful. Those are the kinds of things you can do, again, if you're starting with land that's cheap, right? So you can kind of, you've got that ability to force that to happen because you've got those incentives that you control.
How do you? Are there any mechanisms that you will use to keep the land cheap, or the cost of living in Forest City cheap, or is it kind of you're just gonna leave it to the market and just create more homes and hope that kind of brings down the price?
So the houses are, and this again is what makes it very distinct from any other kind of scheme out there. And again, everyone's pretty depressed with the state of kind of private development for the last 20 years, and again, rightfully so. So why is this, and how is this exactly different? It's the houses are basically a loss leader for us, if you want to kind of put it in that kind of crude way. We don't make, the idea is that the project makes very little money from the housing. Where we make the money, or where the project makes the money to be able to then afford the infrastructure, is from the commercial land. Again, which is at a premium, we know, both in Cambridge and in London. I think Knight Frank has just come out with a report saying there'll be zero commercial space left in 2028. That's good news for us, right? As Forest City, you're like, great, come here. And if it's a special economic zone, even better. You get a kind of discount on business rates and the like. So brilliant, just like they did with Canary Wharf. But the housing should be a loss leader. Now, if you want it to be a loss leader, so we're aiming, and we're talking to a company called Hour, run by a guy called Gilles, who uses robotic arms to create the kind of wooden core structure, the skeleton of a house, and incredibly efficiently, incredibly cheaply, brilliant. Maybe we can work as well, and we're also talking to a bunch of other people who could do kind of the facades in stone, again, cut by robots, or is it just CNC? I don't know. But we're starting those projects now to also really drill down into making these things cheaply but beautifully, right? If we can create a 4-bedroom terraced house for £350,000, which also pays for a bit of the land for each housing unit, if you want, then the question then becomes: okay, someone comes along, they buy it. The similar house in Cambridge will cost upwards of £1 million. They'd just sell it, wouldn't they? You'd be crazy not to. You could instantly bank £600,000 or something like that. So then you need to be able to then control that and ensure that, well, hang on, that these discounts, this gift is passed on to future generations. Because you don't want to just say, okay, well, you're a lucky few, well done on winning the lottery of life, and then, 2 months later, it's all over. That doesn't make any sense. So how do we deal with that? And the answer is a community land trust, which is basically, in short, we say, okay, you're going to be able to buy this at a huge discount, right? It's going to be basically a third of the price of what you'd be able to get in Cambridge, just down the road. In which case, when you want to sell it, you have to sell it back to the city. We'll give you a little bit of uplift. Well done on being a pioneer and coming here first. But you basically saved a bunch of money by not paying that huge mortgage all this time in the meantime. And then we will then sell it onwards, and we'll put a little bit of uplift for the city and capture that land value uplift back, and then plow that back into infrastructure. So that's the scheme. So basically, you're saying to people, look, do you want a really cheap house? Great. And the only catch is you have to sell it back at roughly the same price with inflation, and you'll get a little bit of uplift whenever you want to sell it. And then 1/3 of the houses are cooperative rental. So rental 70% purchased.
Is that similar to the scheme? What was it? The first house scheme? I don't know what it's called. Where the government would kind of, you get a discount on a house if you sold it back for the same
help
price.
To buy,
help to buy, I think it was.
Shared housing schemes, there's loads of these things. I find all of those things, I mean, fiscally, they haven't really worked out for anyone involved there. So this is just a lot simpler than any of that. It's your house, right? But the land, and it's a lease system, effectively. It's what cities like Singapore do. It's what Britain pioneered. Through places like Bourneville and Letchworth, Garden City. That was also the intention, was exactly the same, that you could sort of pass these benefits on. If someone was going to make that sacrifice up front, partly the people who currently live there, the villagers, there's about 8,000 people, partly also the government by, saying, right, we'll have these huge powers to make sure that things can be built quickly and efficiently, and partly us as founders, if you want. Great, then those benefits should be passed down through the generation so people don't have to worry about housing. It's the last thing people should be paying for. It's really stupid. I live in a Victorian terraced house. It's 150 years old. Why am I paying? It's worth £1 million. It's ridiculous. But why? That's insane. The big bricks, all the building, all the labourers, they all paid 150 years ago. I mean, it's sort of falling apart. But why are we still paying for this? It's nuts. We should be spending our money on other things. It's made us every economist knows, it's made Britain deeply inefficient in that sense and deeply unproductive because you're spending your money on interest payments so that someone else doesn't maybe have to work so hard and gets to cash out. And that's ridiculous.
And the most bizarre thing is that they're not even assets. They're liabilities because they degrade over time. They don't. I mean, the land obviously is an asset, but the house itself is degrading over time. So, to me, the community land trust part, when Shiv and I were first talking about the city, was the bit that I was the least comfortable with. My default is a bit more on the right and a bit more on the markets will solve it. So we just need to build loads of houses, and this community land trust stuff is a bit socialist and a bit weird and probably going to break the whole thing. But really the thing that I like about it is that it actually feels a bit more Victorian in a way, where it's we're actually going to do things, we're going to invest our money and our time and our effort and sacrifice something, potentially some profit margin. Though, again, I don't actually think the scheme would work if we allowed people to just flip the homes or try to make more money on the homes. It's to me a really Victorian sense of paying it forwards and setting up the future of the country for success.
One other thing to say, you need to sell the homes cheaply, right? So every other house builder is basically, and every other private development scheme, even the public ones, Ebbsfleet, for example, is suffering from this one thing. They can't sell enough houses. So that's why our building rates are partially that low, because they can't get rid of them, because no one can afford them. Right? So if you want to sell them...
construction costs are very high as well.
Well, they are, but actually that isn't the problem. So most of the cost of this is that you've got, let's say you've got 2,000 homes you need to build. You need to squeeze every last bit of profit out of that plot of land. So you're hopefully going to get away with not doing your infrastructure promises on your Section 106 agreements and blah, 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 right? So you've got that part, but it's taken 15 years, right, to sort of get this through. And you didn't know whether it was going to go through at all, whether you're going to get planning permissions. That's also nuts, but that's the primary risk. Right? So if you're dealing at that scale, which is what most housing schemes are, the last thing in the world you want to do is sell below market rate. That would be insane, right? Yeah. You'd be sacked if you presume. There's no model for doing it otherwise. And of course, you've already got to do your affordable home. So some people at the bottom end of the economic scale, they get really cheap houses. Everyone else has to beg their parents for a deposit. Right, and what else? If you don't have rich parents, then you're stuffed. Which is why they're not selling. So you have to break that deadlock. And if you've got a chance to break that deadlock, because you've got this commercial land to offset, then great, go for it. Why wouldn't you? Because you can build way faster than anyone else, and you can actually create the housing, and you can create the city far faster than anyone else. And that was one of the first retorts from people in government, people who are very senior advisors. They said, you've been at this for 30 years. Oh, you'll never be able to build more than, 8,000 homes a year, right? You need to build at least 16,000. I mean, even that 8,000 is too much. And you're like, yeah, because you're selling the houses for $750,000. No one can afford that. That's crazy.
The greatest criticism I assume you face is examples such as HS2, Lower Thames Crossing, Hinkley Point C, big, fairly ambitious in the UK context, projects that were delayed, over budget, face huge political back and forth, and HS2 and was it even the same government, and they just kept changing their view on whether it was a good thing or not. You've got people like Nick Timothy who said that it's not credible because no political party has proposed it. What's your rebuttal to those kind of points? Why would you be different, and why are you credible?
Yeah, I mean, something that's very different about this project to those projects is this is being done, proposed, and will be run privately. Yes, with a public body as part of it, but it's not a government project that will get delayed and judicial reviewed and with poor incentives. This is a project that so far well, the speed that we're moving at already is quite intense. Right now, it's been just over 4 months that we've been going, and we've been the conversations and the progress and the people coming forwards have been amazing. But then, even looking forwards, this isn't a project that you've got a bunch of government-employed bureaucrats to run a project. This is the whole way going to be delivered privately, but at the end of the day, the city is governed by central government. So, from that sense, it's just being delivered in a very different way. So it doesn't have the same pitfalls. What was the other earlier part of that question?
Nick as well.
Nick, yeah.
I mean, look, Nick Timothy wrote a book. And he wrote quite eloquently about the need for new housing and how it should be delivered. And if you actually read his book, you'll find it should be delivered via new towns. And because why? Because that'll pay for the infrastructure, right? You can balance that out, and that's what's needed. So we're kind of taking lessons from him. That he opposes it because it's in his constituency is, basic kind of NIMBY 101 playbook, right? He was obviously going to oppose it because that's what he thinks and believes his constituents want. I don't think that's the case. Haverhill is a town of 30,000 people. It is supposedly, according to Haverhillians, the largest town without a train station. So it really has been left behind. If you walk the high street, you can see the damage that 15 years of austerity has done to that place, and the people there know it. They remember what it used to be like, and even then, it wasn't again particularly well connected. For example, so they sit in traffic. The cars are being damaged by potholes at one end. And there's no hope that government will give them a bunch of cash all of a sudden, like hundreds of millions, to regenerate the town. That's not going to happen. So what is their plan? And their plan, what we're proposing, therefore, is to say, look, ultimately, kind of, it's this funny attitude that I think most people have in Britain. They're like, oh, look, the government should be putting their money into this, right? Our town, our place. You're like, well, why don't you think about how you could actually generate some value, right? So, Joe says I'm kind of a bit left-wing, but actually, if anything, I'm a kind of a corporativist, right? Which is about running businesses. So what is the value that, that area can give to the world? And the answer is very simple. It's space, right? It's just space. People are crying. Cambridge is crying out for space. Haverhill itself is crying out for space. They've run out of space for their own, the people who moved from Cambridge, right? So if that's what they can trade, and then in return, they get a bunch of things, jobs for the next 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, just in construction alone, tens of thousands. But, regionally, as a regional piece, again, we're going to have to, if you're going to build a city, you can't just randomly plonk it there. You've got to connect it. So we're talking about a train line that runs from the heart of the city, not just to Haverhill, but down all the way to Stansted and then, therefore, London-Liverpool Street. And that train line also connects East-West Rail. It is the actual anchor point for the Oxcam Arc. It'll be the Oxford Forest City arc at some point, because that's how that should be placed. But it is a proper anchor then for the rest of, the east of England, or East Anglia, if you want to kind of term it that way. Suffolk doesn't have a city. And Ipswich and Felixstowe are desperately crying out to be connected. That place has just been long ignored. People there know it, right? Their roads are terrible. It takes, 3.5 hours, so it takes 2 hours to travel the bit from Ely to kind of North Norfolk, whereas it takes about an hour and 20 minutes to get from Ely to kind of London, right? Because it's got proper roads. This is what when we talk about lack of productivity, this is what we mean. People hanging around doing stuff a lot slower than they should be because the infrastructure is poor.
What's the biggest challenge facing the completion of this project? Like, you've got great traction over the last 4.5 months since you've announced it. You've obviously got a big support base, volunteers, people publicly coming out. But when you look forward, where's the real kind of challenge points and blockers that you're most concerned about?
We might disagree on this. I would say that the sort of the fundamental risk to this project is getting to royal assent, or not getting to royal assent effectively. So we do all this planning, we do all this work, we get a master plan that we think makes sense, that experts think makes sense. We spend a bunch of investor money, and then the government gets cold feet right at the end. That, I think, is the main risk to this, because after that point, it's basically execution, and it's like formal development corporation. There's money to buy the land. There's money to build the city. So I think that stage, I'm maybe as we get closer to it, it'll become a bit more sort of closer and real and more daunting. But right now, in my mind, that like afterwards, that's the less risky part. Up to that point, we've got loads of different potential pinch points. In my mind, we're basically in execution mode now. If it's ours to screw up, if we don't execute correctly on the plans and have something in time for government to look at and work through, and we're not effective at hand-holding government through that process, and civil service and politicians, if at the end of the day we can't convince the Secretary of State responsible and the Prime Minister that this is a good thing, that is going to be good for them and good for the country, then that's to me the biggest risk.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of, if you want to use this phrase, stakeholders to buy in. And we've spent a long time, I mean, it's been at the time of we're recording, right? It's been kind of 4.5 months since we launched at the LFG event at the O2 in front of 1,200 people on October the 23rd. So it's but in that time we put in a lot of work talking to pretty much everyone on the political scene, whether that's from, on the Cambridge side, because the plot stretches across Cambridge and then West Suffolk. So both, politicians on both those sides, we've spent a long time speaking to them. And then obviously there's central government, both Treasury, MHCLG, etc. And then, of course, there's everyone else, right, who's not sort of part of a formal political alliance, but, from Cambridge University as kind of the big beast in the room, but also kind of small businesses and, the kind of Haverhill town council, local councillors more widely, and then obviously going to the villages, which have been very difficult conversations, of course, as you'd expect.
Do you get a lot of opposition from that, or...?
Yeah, I mean, not so long ago, I was in a village called Kirtling. I didn't expect anyone necessarily to show up. Two of the other pubs that we'd booked events at, we were supposed to go together, and two of the other pubs cancelled because they said, we don't want anything to do with this city thing. And this was before kind of the plans were out. So it was they just didn't like it prima facie, right? And anyway, we were out leafleting in Haverhill for an event to kind of get people to come to learn more. But I said, look, Joe, you can kind of go home. I'll handle this thing in Kirtling. I'm sure no one will show. Well, 30 people showed up, and it was just me and 30 people, and I hadn't eaten anything, and it was good. We had disaster kind of written all over it. But actually, we had, there were people who stormed out. There were also lots of people who shook my hand on the way out. They were grateful at least to. I came, right? Imagine if I hadn't come, that would have been really bad. But, there was a story, there was one woman's story or remark really stuck with me. I'll just call her Emma, but she was 70, quite tall and kind of elegant. And she had a husband who was studiously taking notes throughout, quietly spoken, very quietly, which is obviously quite a difference to the rest of the room. And she said to me this, as she was leaving, she stayed 2.5 hours, right pretty much at the end. She said, look, Shiv, if this does go ahead, I'm 70, I'm not going anywhere. And I'm going to have to live with all of this building work to the end of my days. And I said, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry for the anxiety that I've caused people, just in and of itself. Just the idea alone has caused people anxiety. Anyway, she came back for our event in Haverhill a couple of days later, spent another 2.5 hours listening to all of this. And one thing I then asked, I said, thank you so much, Emma, for coming. And by the way, do you have children? And she said, yes, I've got 2. One son who lived in Cambridge, he's 40. I said, well, where does he live now? He had to move away. Why? Because he couldn't afford housing. So, these are the tensions that are going on, right? It's never cut and dry. Yes, some people are just like, I've never been to a city, I don't want to ever live near one, and I certainly don't want this place to turn into one. And, we're going to face that. But on the other hand, actually, there's all these, at the family level, all these tensions going on. And people are trying to navigate all of that.
Is there like a healthy kind of proposed compensation kind of scheme that you'd look at for residents?
So we're working, or the intention is to work with UEA, and for them to be kind of independent arbiters / a voice for villagers and work with them intently for over a year to understand not just kind of compensation. And we're in Britain, very prissy about talking about compensation. In France, they're like, great, build us a nuclear power station, pay us loads of money, pay for the school, give us cash to our local village. We all love nuclear power stations. Here, we're like, oh, that's bribery. I couldn't possibly do that. So we'll build a bat tunnel instead and maybe save 300 bats, who knows, and it's a 125 million bill. Like, it's insane, right? Completely irrational. But it's a much deeper thing than simply compensation, though actually I'm all in favor of just that. Like, if people want to leave and because they don't want to live in a city, then they should be properly recompensed. But it's also, what more can you do? Because it turns out, again, collectivizing some of that cash, you can put it to say, okay, well, look, you've also got issues, right, with where are you going to live from an assisted living perspective.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to move 20 miles away, so maybe we can do something with that, right? There are
or
all
even
these kind of
be able to live with your kids and they have enough room.
Right, exactly. There's all these kind of creative solutions that suddenly when you start conversing, you can come up.
And when you look at places like I work in the city, and one of the main reasons I love it so much is because they've been able to keep the old and the new, and I think it looks very beautiful, kind of contrasted together, and that kind of the history of Haverhill and what have you, and buildings that people feel that are particularly important to the community or what have you. Like, there are ways architecturally of like going around and making sure that some stuff is preserved, right?
There are these beautiful churches as well. Like one of the churches we visited in Great Bradley, it's you go in and it's a beautiful old church, and you look at the boards with all the rectors, and the first was something like 1306, was it? 1306?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
This is just this really old, really historic building, and that's something that really, really needs to be incorporated into the city, and potentially could, in 50 years, be a thriving hub for young families all going to church every Sunday and having events for the community every evening. And that currently it's basically on a field with one big house next to it. But maybe it's going to be surrounded by community in a few decades.
But we have this problem basically everywhere in the UK. I mean, because we've had such kind of the way that our society is built up is we've just had such kind of villages that have existed for basically thousands of years. Some of them. It's so hard to kind of go against that. But like, I think ultimately, you do need to be looking to the future and like, what is the future of these places when we have had like a rapid change in what our society kind of looks like.
Well, look, people often say, as you've just done, right? This has been like this for 1,000 years. And actually, in some cases, obviously, that is true. But there's been way more change than people think, right? People love to stick stuff in aspic and say it's always been like this. It's just not true. Haverhill itself was it 1950s? It was 3,000 people. It was basically a very small town. Actually famous for brickworks, building, it turns out. And then the government decided to turn it at the same time when they closed, as part of the beaching cuts, the train station. A few years later, they decided to then add another 25,000 people to it, or 20,000 people or something. So again, crazy decision-making processes, but there we go.
And it's not just buildings either, it's also nature. One of the first things, as Shiv said, we sort of get a map out and we're like, right, where's the forest going to go? And so Paul Paulersland, our sort of environmentalist, he's sort of representing nature on the project. He went and found a bunch of old maps from the 1800s, and you see where all these ancient woodlands used to be. And so suddenly that's the priority. We're going to replenish these woodlands and make them actual woodlands again. And obviously it takes time to grow them, and you integrate them into the existing woodlands, which are sort of also old themselves. But you connect them all and you get this amazing sort of network of nature, of woodland. And so these places have actually changed quite significantly, and within the plot they've become really intensively farmed, much more intensively than they were previously. So they have changed, and they've been changed by the current generations, they've been changed by generations past, and I think it's sort of our responsibility to change things for the better of the country. So.
Just to add in on nature, right? So people are like, you're going to concrete over 45,000 acres. I mean, that's patently untrue, because 12,000 at least will be a woodland, right? So that's not correct. But first of all, the tree cover in West Suffolk is about 8.6 something percent. It's just under 9%. Tree cover in London is 20%. So monocultural agriculture has done huge damage in that sense to nature in that part of the world. It's just a fact. I mean, even more widely, you can kind of reason it from first principles. About 9% of the country is, as in England, is urban, and that includes the parks and the golf courses and everything else, right? Not just the bit that's tarmacked on, if you want. 66% is farmland. So if we're one of the most nature-deprived countries in Europe, well, why? You can kind of start to guess. So the huge amount of biodiversity net gain from Forest City, it'll be, I mean, as I said, it'll be one of the largest nature reserves in the country and the largest land-based nature reserve by a mile.
So we're almost at time, but what would be great to chat about in the final few minutes is what's next for Forest City. What's your plan? Where are you going to go? How can people help if they want to?
The best thing for people who are interested in getting involved is to go onto the website. There's a Get Involved page and join the WhatsApp group. We've got a public discussion group. It's got people in there who like the city. It's got people in there who don't like the city. We managed to keep it pretty civil in there. Every now and then there needs to be an interjection, but it's pretty good. People's sharing their hopes and their dreams and maybe their reservations and concerns. But yeah, that's a really great way to get involved. Also, definitely sign the pledge, provided you agree with it.
We're also going to need, in a sense, an army of supporters. This won't come just super easy because Joe and I rock up and it's all great and wonderful. We're already facing sort of pushback, as you'd expect, on the ground. But there'll be a larger political battle, and people need to fight for this, right? It goes back to that thing about millennials and why haven't they shown up for themselves all this time? And now you've got Gen Zers as well in that bracket. Well, now's the moment, right? This really could very much be real, and this is something, therefore, hopefully, for people to actually fight for. So come and join that fight.
Yeah, so join the WhatsApp group, sign the petition, put in your email. We are the pledge. Sign the pledge. It's not a petition, it's a pledge. Sign the pledge, join the WhatsApp group, and at some point very, very soon, we're going to be putting out a call to arms for people to come and back this and actually march for housing.
Perfect. Well, Shiv, Joe, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It's been excellent to talk through this, and very excited about the next
thank
steps.
you very much.
Thanks for having us.
You.
It's been great.
Pleasure to be here.